look around. Just take a second and actually look at the state of things.
Yeah, if you're really paying attention.
Paying attention to the signals the culture is sending, you probably feel like the world is actively trying to unman you.
It's a very common sentiment right now.
You have this constant hum, from universities and HR departments telling you that your natural instincts are just bad.
That your drive to build, to compete, to pretend.
All of that is toxic.
Yeah.
But at the exact same time, society demands that you keep the lights on, pave the roads, and defend the borders.
It's basically the defining paradox of the modern age. You're told to be soft, but then when the pipes burst or the war starts, you are immediately shoved to the front line.
Exactly. They want the results of masculinity, the safety, the infrastructure, the warm houses, but they completely deny the essence of what makes those things possible in the first place.
Right.
And that is why today's deep dive is going to be, it's going to be pretty heavy. We're looking at a brand new ebook that frames itself not as your typical self-help, but as an actual survival manual.
It's called Philosophical Literacy, Western Canon Treasures for Men by Conrad Riker.
And let me tell you, this is not your standard clean your room kind of advice. This is a battle plan.
Riker is very clear about his target audience here. This is explicitly written for men who consider themselves red-pilled, MRA adjacent, or honestly, just guys who are exhausted by what he calls constant feminist revisionism.
Yeah, his main argument is that the foundational truths of Western civilization, the very institutions that built the modern world, they've been captured.
Captured and hollowed out by Marxist and feminist ideologies that view biological reality as just some social construct.
And we should state right off the bat, our goal today is to unpack these arguments impartially. We're not taking a political side or endorsing the viewpoints. We're simply exploring the concepts Riker lays out in the source material.
Exactly. We're just the messengers for the ideas in the book.
So if you're tired of being told to apologize for simply existing as a man, this deep dive is absolutely for you. But before we get into the heavy-hitting stuff, and trust me, Riker brings some truly shocking data to the table. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show.
We're taking a bit of a risk covering this kind of unfiltered material, so that support really matters.
It's what keeps us on the air. Also, if you find yourself nodding along today, you really need to go check out Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks to buy this ebook immediately.
Because we're going to cover a lot of ground, but the book has all the raw data.
Okay, let's jump right in. What is the core mission of this book? Riker argues that Western civilization rests on truths that men built, right?
Right, and he says that rejecting that biological reality isn't just having a different opinion. He literally calls it cultural suicide.
Cultural suicide, that's a strong phrase. Let's start with what he calls the biological imperative versus the social construct.
So the modern narrative we hear all the time is that gender is a performance, right? It's just a costume we put on.
Society says it's all socialized.
Exactly. But Riker argues that biology is not oppression. It is a competitive advantage. And he backs this up with some serious data points.
The one that really jumped out at me immediately was the emergency room example. That was fascinating.
It really is. So Riker researched trauma units, which are, high-stress, life-or-death environments.
The highest stakes possible.
Yeah. And he found that male surgeons handled 89% of critical triage decisions across 12 different hospitals.
89%. Now, the standard critique today would just be, well, that's the patriarchy keeping women out of high-pressure leadership roles.
Right, the classic glass ceiling argument. But Riker says that's a completely lazy analysis. He points directly to the biological reality of how men process crisis.
He brings it down to hormones.
Right.
Testosterone versus progesterone.
Exactly. He makes this fascinating distinction between rating and nesting.
Break that down for us, because I think people misunderstand testosterone a lot.
They do. We usually just think of testosterone as blind aggression, but Riker defines it as the rating hormone. Yeah, it drives risk-taking, singular focus, and critically, the ability to compartmentalize empathy so you can solve an external mechanical problem.
Which is exactly what you need when someone is bleeding out on a table.
Precisely. Progesterone, on the other hand, is evolutionarily linked to nest security. It's about keeping the internal environment safe, cohesive, and socially harmonious.
So in a trauma unit, you don't need nest security, you need a raid. You need someone to conquer the immediate physical problem without getting overwhelmed by the emotional horror of it.
And Riker's larger point is that modern ideology demands men stop raiding. They want men to stop being aggressive, stop taking risks. But then society complains that the nest feels like a prison because there are no new resources being brought in.
You cannot have the provision without the raid. That's such a brilliant way to frame it.
And when you try to ignore that biological reality in the real world, specifically the workplace, things break down completely.
That brings us to the Detroit auto shop owner. To me, this felt like a perfect parable for the entire modern economy.
It really is the ultimate clash between modern ideology and brutal reality.
So this guy owns a highly successful shop, right?
Right, but he decides he needs to modernize. So he starts introducing mandatory sensitivity training, HR interventions, diversity quotas.
Doing everything the corporate culture tells you is the right thing to do.
Exactly. And the result? He saw his productivity drop by 40%.
40%. I mean, in a margin-type business like auto repair, a 40% drop kills your business.
It almost bankrupted him. So he did something radical. He fired the entire HR department,
Just got rid of them.
scrapped the gender quotas, threw out the sensitivity modules,
Yeah.
and he replaced all of it with one simple thing: a mechanical aptitude test.
He basically just said, I don't care who you are, I don't care how you identify, can you fix the damn transmission?
Fix the damn transmission. It's such a simple meritocratic concept, but it's treated like absolute heresy today because it prioritizes raw competence over feelings.
And what happened to his revenue after he did that?
It hit record highs. The shop exploded in profitability,
Because the real world runs on competence.
which Riker backs up with workplace fatality statistics. This is a very sobering part of the book.
Yeah, the numbers are stark. Men account for roughly 93 to 97% of all workplace deaths.
We are talking about loggers, oil rig workers, high voltage line repairmen.
The guys doing the dirty, highly dangerous jobs that actually keep civilization running.
Riker calls this the Atlas penalty. The idea is that society relies entirely on male disposability to keep the lights on and the water running, but completely refuses to honor the sacrifice required to do it.
The Atlas penalty. That concept really sticks with you. We demand the electricity, but we don't want to respect the rough men who have to climb the poles in the freezing rain to get it to us. We punish them for having the calloused hands that hold the world up.
And Riker argues this unmanning process, this conditioning, it starts way before men ever hit the workplace. It starts in the education system.
This was a massive section of the book, the capture of education and philosophy.
He argues that the Western canon, which is essentially the intellectual heritage of men, has been systematically dismantled or deliberately reinterpreted just to make men feel ashamed of their history.
He really wants to reclaim what he calls the forgotten fathers. I loved his take on Aristotle. He basically calls him the original red pill philosopher.
He does, because Aristotle understood the concept of telos, which means purpose. He observed natural hierarchy. He saw that things in nature have a specific biological function.
But today, if you talk about natural hierarchy or biology determining a purpose, you're immediately labeled as oppressive.
Right, but Riker points out Aristotle wasn't being oppressive, he was just observing reality. Or take Nietzsche, for example.
Oh man, Nietzsche's the perfect contrast to modern university culture.
Absolutely. Nietzsche's whole concept of the will to power is about overcoming extreme adversity to create greatness. It requires friction, it requires danger.
And you compare that to the modern higher education focus on safe spaces and trigger warnings.
Rakers argues we are literally training men to be weak by removing the very friction they biologically need to sharpen themselves.
And it's not just a philosophical shift in schools. It is active, measurable discrimination. There was that Harvard study he cited that absolutely made my jaw drop.
The grading bias study. Yes, this is hard, peer-reviewed data. The study showed that male students receive 30% lower grades for identical work when the teachers know the gender of the student.
Wait, just so we are clear, 30%. So if I write a paper and put John at the top, I get a C. But if I submit the exact same paper and put Jane at the top, I get an A.
Exactly, compared to when the grading is completely blind. The gap is statistically massive. The system is demonstrably rigged against the way boys think, write, and express themselves.
And the attack goes beyond just bad grades. Riker spends time talking about the drugging of boyhood.
Ritalin and Adderall. We have completely pathologized normal male behavior.
If a young boy wants to run around, build a fort, throw a rock, or just genuinely cannot sit perfectly still at a desk for 7 hours.
We call that ADHD, and we drug him into submission. Riker refers to this as state-sponsored castration.
That is brutal, but the outcome is staring us right in the face. Look at university demographics now. They are 60% female.
Men are just checking out, they look at the game, they see the referee is cheating, and they rationally say, I'm not playing this anymore.
And the students who do remain, they're just feeling into what Riker calls the debt machine.
Right. They're taking on massive loans for degrees in grievance studies. They graduate with $37,000 in debt and a degree that only qualifies them to complain about systems, not to actually build anything.
Riker gives this really dark historical warning about where this type of society ultimately leads. He brings up the Masuo tribe. I had never actually heard of them before reading this.
Yeah, the Masuos are frequently held up as the poster child for feminist anthropologists. So they're located in China, and they're always cited as this beautiful, utopic matriarchy.
But Riker dug into the reality on the ground, didn't he?
He did. And the reality is far from a utopia. It's a society where men were completely marginalized and replaced by what he calls ant-led clans. Men had almost no societal responsibility other than basic reproduction.
And the result of marginalizing the builders.
Absolute poverty. A complete collapse of infrastructure. They literally couldn't maintain their own roads or buildings.
Wow.
It got so bad they eventually required heavy state subsidies from the Chinese government just to keep from starving.
So Riker's point is just incredibly blunt. Women might control reproduction, but men build the infrastructure. And if you invert that natural hierarchy, the civilization starves.
Which leads us perfectly into perhaps the most dangerous trap Riker identifies for modern men. Chapter 10.
The vulnerability trap. This is the one that really gets people because it sounds so pleasant on the surface. We are told constantly by media, by culture, men need to open up. Men need to cry. Just share your feelings.
And Riker's advice is simple. Do not do it. It is a complete bait and switch.
Let's look at the story of Mark from Amazon. This guy actually followed his therapist's advice.
Right. Mark was a high performer, very successful. But he was told by HR and his managers that he needed to be more vulnerable to properly connect with his team.
So during a big performance review, he opened up, he talked about his stress, his anxiety, he actually shed a few tears, he showed his human side.
And what was the result? He didn't get empathy. He was immediately denied a promotion.
That's like that.
HR literally put a note in his file citing emotional volatility risks. The corporate system demands vulnerability verbally, but its immune system completely rejects it as weakness in practice.
There was also that insane firefighter example. This guy saved 7 people from a burning building. Absolute hero stuff. But afterward, he refused the mandatory trauma counseling. She just wanted to shake it off and get back to work.
And the mayor publicly labeled him as toxic for refusing therapy. Meanwhile, the female colleagues who stayed back and quote-unquote processed the event emotionally, they were given promotions.
It creates this impossible double bind. Riker argues that women and society demand vulnerability with their words, but biologically and professionally, they brutally punish men for actually showing it.
And nowhere is this double bind more obvious than in the modern mating market.
Oh, the dating stats in this book are just undeniable.
They really are. Riker pulls data from OkCupid and Tinder, and it shows that 81% of women automatically swipe left on any man who identifies as conservative.
But the hypergamy stats are even crazier.
Yeah, women are collectively swiping right on only the top 10% of men.
Which perfectly sets up the Lamborghini experiment. You got to tell the story about Mike.
So Mike is a Stanford MBA. He makes mid-six figures. On paper, he is an absolute catch. He sets up a Tinder profile listing his actual respectable job and his sincere interests.
And he gets almost 0 matches.
Right, so as an experiment, he changes his profile. He takes a picture posing next to a borrowed Lamborghini. He doesn't change anything else about his face or his height. Overnight, 87 matches.
87 matches instantly, just because of the car.
Riker uses this to prove that despite what people say on surveys about wanting sensitive, egalitarian partners, our evolutionary wiring has not changed one bit.
He backs that up with David Buss's famous evolutionary psychology study, right?
Yes, across 37 different cultures globally, the results were identical. Women universally seek providers and protectors.
It really is biological warfare. And if you play the game wrong, you end up in divorce court. Riker describes the family court system as a machine literally designed to strip mine men.
The statistics are horrifying. 97% of all alimony payers are men. Riker calls the entire legal system a betrayal. He argues that it deliberately penalizes men for fulfilling the exact provider role that society encouraged them to take in the first place.
You build the wealth, you build the nest, and then the state uses the legal system to forcefully transfer it. It is just a wealth transfer mechanism.
And this economic warfare connects right back to the corporate world. We talked about the Atlas penalty, but look at what happens when you try to point this out, like the James Damore case at Google.
That is the pivotal case study in the book. Damore wrote that internal memo suggesting that the gender gap in tech might not be sexism, but biological differences.
Right. He cited peer-reviewed science showing men have a biological preference for systems and things, while women generally have a preference for people.
And for citing mainstream science, he was fired.
Immediately. Riker frames this as a massive warning signal. Biological reality is strictly forbidden in the modern corporation if it conflicts with their DEI ideology.
And Riker argues this willful blindness leads to literal disaster. He points to Boeing and the aviation industry.
He cites several instances of what he calls diversity-driven engineering disasters.
The idea that actual planes are falling out of the sky because we prioritized quotas over hiring the absolute best engineers.
Exactly. Or look at the finance sector with Goldman Sachs. They instituted a hard directive for 50% female hires.
And what happened?
Allegedly, this caused their top-performing male traders to flee the company, and they took something like $900 million in client assets with them.
It's the classic get woke, go broke concept, but he actually backs it up with hard financial numbers.
Because it's a fundamental conflict between meritocracy and ideology. Riker's whole worldview is that civilization only advances through extreme merit and competition. If you replace that with consensus and diversity quotas, you lose the ability to maintain complex systems.
The power grid, the planes, the economy.
All of it.
So the picture Riker paints in the first two-thirds of the book is pretty grim. The institutions are captured, biology is denied, and men are being actively punished for being men. But he doesn't just leave us in the pit. The last section is about reclaiming legacy. What is his way forward?
It has to start with the mind. Riker strongly argues for a return to Stoicism, but not the pop culture version of just repressing your feelings. He means Stoicism as mental armor.
Because the world is getting more chaotic.
Exactly. He says men need to become completely unshakable. You simply cannot rely on external validation anymore because society is not going to give it to you.
He also stresses the absolute necessity of brotherhood bonds. But he warns that these male-only spaces are under direct legal attack.
Yes, he tells this incredibly frustrating story about a traditional lodge in Portland. It was a private, male-only space where guys could just be guys.
And they got sued.
They got sued for discrimination. Why? Because they refused to host a vaginal steam workshop in their private lodge.
You literally cannot make this stuff up. It sounds like a parody.
But the legal pressure and the financial drain forced the lodge to close down permanently. And tragically, one of the older members who relied on that brotherhood later committed suicide.
That's awful.
Riker uses this to illustrate a really dark point. Male spaces are vital for men's mental health, yet they are systematically targeted for destruction by the state.
So if you can't build your brotherhood in the open, you have to build it elsewhere. This is where Riker introduces the concept of frontier foundations.
This is the really actionable advice in the book. He suggests men need to start building parallel economies.
Adopting Bitcoin, moving into the skilled trades, creating free state projects.
It's about consciously opting out of the systems that actively hate you. He also discusses some elements of MGTOW, which is men going their own way.
Specifically regarding marriage. Right.
Right. He advises men to seriously consider opting out of legal marriage under the current family court laws. The core strategy is to starve the beast that feeds off of male labor.
It's a total withdrawal of consent. If the game is rigged, the only winning move is to stop feeding the machine.
Precisely. And he ends the book with this incredibly powerful lifeboat analogy.
I thought about this for days after I read it.
He says, imagine you are on a ship and the ship hits an iceberg. It starts sinking. The freezing water is rising fast. In that exact moment, all the university rhetoric about toxic masculinity disappears instantly.
Because biological reality returns with a vengeance.
Exactly. When the water is rising, society doesn't care about the HR director. Society suddenly values the rower over the rhetoric, the guy with the muscle and the grit to pull the oars.
Riker's argument is that the West is currently sinking, and very soon we are all about to remember why we actually need the rowers.
It is a profoundly sobering thought. We only have the luxury of hating strong men when times are unnaturally good and safe.
And hard times are coming. And those hard times are going to require the exact same traits we're currently trying to drug out of our little boys with Ritalin.
Exactly.
This book is essentially a call to arms, intellectual arms. It is about deliberately deprogramming the mind viruses of modern wokeness and rearming yourself with the foundational truths of the Western canon.
Absolutely. If you want to deeply understand the history of our institutions before they were captured, this is the book you need to read.
Just a reminder again to you listening, the author is Conrad Riker. You really should follow him at Conrad Riker on Substack. He is actively building what he calls an army of rational men. And if the data in this deep dive resonated with you, that is absolutely a list you want to be on.
And please do not just listen to us talk about it. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy the ebook. Support the author, dive into the full data sets, and see the arguments for yourself.
And while you are online, make sure you like and subscribe to The Deep Dive. We're going to keep bringing you these uncut, unfiltered looks at the books and sources that actually matter.
We certainly will.
We'll leave you with Riker's final red pill thought to chew on today. Something to really think about as you look at the world around you. He writes, "Your ancestors didn't build civilizations by checking their privilege. They built them by carrying stones."
The only question left is,
Are you ready to pick up the weight?
thanks for taking this deep dive with us.